I want to give you a hypothetical scenario here. This man is Ohio State quarterback Will Howard. I have no idea where he's going to go in the 2025 NFL Draft if you're watching as of the day this video gets released. However, he's probably going to go somewhere between rounds 2 and 5, which is super helpful, I know. Almost like a weatherman saying that you can expect anywhere from 0 to 8 inches of snow over the weekend. There's a bit of a difference there, but that's beside the point. The point is this. I want you to imagine that the New York Jets decide to draft Howard in the 3rd round. Let's just say that for the purposes of this hypothetical, the Jets turn in their draft card, and it says, Will Howard, quarterback, Ohio State. The pick gets announced by whoever's announcing the Jets' pick at the time, and then the Jets realize, oh crap, wait a second guys, time out. We don't need Howard right now. We've got 4 quarterbacks on the roster, Jordan Travis is healthy, and Howard might still be there in round 4. We want a do-over. We want to pick someone else. Imagine a team just saying, we want to redo our pick, and the NFL actually saying, you know what guys? We're going to let you do it over. Once you turn in the draft card and the pick gets announced, that should be it. Assuming it is a legal pick, that should be allowed. If we just let every team retroactively change their pick, the draft would devolve into absolute chaos. You know how chaotic it is during fantasy football when something happens and the commissioner has to roll back the picks? Amplify that by a billion when there's actual stakes involved, and it'd be awful. There's a reason that this doesn't happen. At least, in theory. Because this man right here is Buffalo Bills quarterback, Dan Darragh. We're going to get to how bad he was in professional football in just a little bit, because the William & Mary quarterback was an affront on the eyes at times. However, the story of how he got to the Buffalo Bills and got into the AFL, or I guess the NFL, in the first place is kind of remarkable. Not because of the fact that he got drafted, but rather because of how he got drafted. Because Darragh got drafted by Buffalo, I kid you not, on a redo. The Bills got to do their pick over, and we're going to break down the absolute chaos behind what transpired at the 1968 NFL-AFL combined draft. Because this is the story behind the most chaotic draft pick in Buffalo Bills history, and one of the most chaotic draft picks that I guarantee you have never heard about before. Be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL and the NFL draft with stories like this one. And I would really appreciate your support as we try and grow this community of football lovers and sports historians even more. So thanks in advance for supporting the channel, and with that in mind, let's talk about the time that the Bills made a DD drafting DD, as in a dumb decision drafting Dan Darragh. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just who the man that you've been watching this whole time, Dan Darragh, is in the first place. When you think of the worst quarterbacks in the history of professional football, odds are this person might be one of the first names that comes to mind. This is Buffalo Bills quarterback Dan Darragh, and let's just say that there's a reason that the Bills were able to get O.J. Simpson and pick first overall in the 1969 NFL-AFL combined draft. Because my God, this man absolutely stunk. Darragh started 11 games of professional football with the Buffalo Bills, and across those 11 games, he went just 1-10. And it's not as though he played well in that one win, as the lone game Darragh won was a game where he went 8 for 18, completing 44% of his passes for 79 yards with no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 34.3, which is worse if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. So even in the one game that Darragh won, he stunk, and somehow just fluked his way into victory. Across his time with the Bills, the man threw 4 touchdowns and 22 interceptions, which means that for every touchdown he threw 5.5 picks. He ended his career with a passer rating of 30.4. He did not have a single game in his career where he threw more than 1 touchdown. And only twice did he have a game where he threw more touchdowns than interceptions, with one of those games being a game against the Oakland Raiders, where he went 4 for 20, completing 20% of his passes and having negative net passing yards, as he took 7 sacks, and finished with minus 39 net passing yards in a 48-6 defeat. So even when his touchdowns interception ratio in a game was positive, he still stunk. Safe to say, Dan Darragh was absolutely atrocious, and there's a reason they are going to be seeing a lot of his lowlights. Granted, Darragh might have been thrown into the fire way too quickly, as a 13th round pick starting the opening game of the season seems absolutely insane. Today, it raises eyebrows when a quarterback taken in the 3rd round starts the first game of his rookie season. So I don't know how a quarterback starting week 1 that was taken in round 13 was expected to go, but Darragh was absolutely terrible. I'm not saying Darragh couldn't play at William & Mary. There's a reason, oddly enough, that Marv Levy, who was the head coach there at the time, brought him in. And he had some good games with the Tribe, even leading the Southern Conference in touchdown passes in 1966, becoming just the 2nd quarterback in school history at the time to accomplish this feat and lead the conference in this category, and actually holding the school record for most touchdown passes at the time that he left. But man, that did not translate whatsoever to the professional game. For some more perspective on how bad Dan Darragh was, as if 4 touchdowns and 22 career interceptions wasn't enough, from 1968 to 1970, there were 38 quarterbacks across the NFL and the AFL to attempt at least 250 career passes. Here they all are, charted nicely on this graph, organized by passer rating. See that bar at the very bottom on the right? That bar that looks like it's in a completely different stratosphere of suck? Turns out, that's not even Dan Darragh. That's not even the right graph. This is the right graph. This bar is Dan Darragh. His passer rating is more than 12 points lower than the next worst quarterback over that time frame. That's how bad he was. I think I've hammered the point home enough at this point. Dan Darragh was a really bad quarterback and might legitimately be the worst quarterback in the history of the Buffalo Bills franchise. Dennis Shaw was drafted by the Bills in the 2nd round of the 1970 NFL Draft, threw 10 touchdowns and 20 interceptions as a rookie, and I'm only half kidding when I say that he won Offensive Rookie of the Year that year despite those stats, purely on the fact that he was not Dan Darragh. Having said all of that, the Dan Darragh pick for the Bills was never supposed to happen. At least, not like this. Because the Bills did not initially choose Darragh in the 13th round with pick number 336. Instead, the Bills decided to go with the defensive lineman, as despite taking 2 already, taking Miami defensive tackle Bob Tatarek in the 2nd round and Penn State defensive end Mike McBath in the 5th round, they decided to take Memphis defensive tackle Chuck DeVleigher. DeVleigher was an anchor on that Memphis defensive line throughout the mid-1960s, and was a big reason why in 1966, the Tigers went 7-2 and finished inside the top 20 in points allowed. Even in 1967, DeVleigher looked really good despite barely practicing, as he was in a reserve unit in the Army, so he would spend his weekdays serving the country and his weekends on the football field. However, a knee injury that DeVleigher suffered during an early November game against Florida State made him miss the remainder of the 1967 campaign, and his impact on Memphis's defense can be felt solely by looking at the numbers before and after his injury. In the 6 games where he was healthy and played in 1967, the Tigers went 5-1 and allowed a very nice 69 points, or 11.5 points per game. 3 times in that stretch, the Tigers held their opponent to single digits, and they even managed to shut out Cincinnati. In the 3 games where he was not healthy, the Tigers went 1-2 and allowed 81 points, allowing 27 points per game. Barely 11 points per game allowed when he was healthy, and 27 points per game allowed when he wasn't. That's a pretty big difference. And the Bills, recognizing his talents, wanted to draft him, seeing as he was still on the board by the time we got to pick number 336. By this point, drafting was a complete crapshoot. For some perspective, in the 13th round of the 1967 combined draft, of the 26 players taken, only 4 of them even so much as played a single game. So about 1 out of every 7 even played in the NFL or the AFL. Only 3 of them played a game with a team that drafted them, so about 1 out of 9, and only 1, Cleveland Browns linebacker Billy Andrews, played past the 1968 season. So the Bills figure that if DeVleigher can play the way he did before the knee injury against Florida State, and if he was healthy, then they got themselves a solid contributor. And if not, no harm done. With that, with pick number 336, the Buffalo Bills selected the Memphis defensive tackle, and that was that. Pretty ho-hum, run-of-the-mill pick. Except, it wasn't. Because after the pick was announced and the Bills turned in their draft card, they realized, oh crap, DeVleigher just got knee surgery. He's not healthy at all. We drafted a player on a bum knee. Keep in mind, this was not new information, and any team that did its homework would have known this. DeVleigher got the knee surgery sometime around November 17th, 1967, more than 2.5 months before the draft. But apparently, the Bills had no idea. They drafted a player without realizing he had knee surgery, and after turning in their draft card, asked the commissioner for a do-over. Yeah, we wouldn't have taken him if we knew about the surgery. Somehow, everyone else knew, seeing as I doubt he'd be on the board at that point if he was healthy. But regardless, the Bills were out here asking for a take-back and to submit another pick. Now, you would think that the Bills wouldn't be allowed to do this, right? The precedent that this could set would be incredibly dangerous. If teams could just roll back their draft pick and get a do-over based on how the board played out because of their own negligence and their own inability to do their homework, the draft would become a mess. This was an entirely foreseeable thing, and the Bills were just going to have to roll the dice and live with it, right? Well, amazingly enough, and this definitely caused a fuss around the draft headquarters, they were allowed to do this. I don't know how, I don't know why, but Commissioner Pete Rozelle allowed the Bills to redo their pick, withdraw their selection of Chuck DeVleigher, and take the man who'd been watching this whole time, their actual 13th round pick, quarterback Dan Darragh. Take 2. They switched from a defensive player to an offensive player, and switched from a defensive tackle to a quarterback. And that's how Dan Darragh got taken by the Bills in the 13th round of the draft. And you would think that this would be the end of the story, right? Except, amazingly enough, it's not. Because after drafting Darragh, and when the 14th round started and the Bills were back on the clock with pick number 361, guess who they took? You guessed it, Chuck DeVleigher. They took the same freaking player that apparently they couldn't take in the 13th round because he was too much of a risk, but they could take in the 14th round. As one person commented on the Bills' thought process, he must have had an operation between phone calls. Riddle me that one. Maybe they called up DeVleigher in between their selections and asked him how his knee was. And when he gave the reassurance that he had the surgery 2.5 months ago, and he was on schedule with the recovery process, they decided to take him. That's fine, but it raises the question why you wouldn't make that call, before you actually chose the man in the 13th round in the first place. Just insane negligence and incompetence on the part of the Bills, which was pretty par for the course for that franchise over the late 60s and the early 70s. DeVleigher didn't do much of anything in professional football, only playing 4 games for the Bills in 1969 after not playing in the regular season in 1968 due to his knee still not being in shape. There is no footage of him available, there is no pronunciation guide available on him, so if I was saying my name wrong the entire time, please let me know in the comments down below. But his impact on the game is felt to this day for one of the strangest moments in the strange history of the NFL draft, and how it led to the Bills taking the man who'd been watching this whole time in Dan Darragh. Again, even though there is precedent for this based on what the Bills did in 1968, there was no way, none whatsoever, that this would be allowed today. And if a general manager screwed up so badly that he asked for a redo immediately after turning in the draft card, he'd be fired on the spot and ridiculed to the high heavens. Not even Nico Harrison would be this dumb, and trust me, he's pretty freaking dumb. But that's exactly what happened in 1968, when the Bills drafted Dan Darragh after rescinding their draft card on Chuck DeVleigher, only to take Chuck DeVleigher a few picks later. Because when it comes to the NFL draft, no one circles the wagon back to their original pick like the Buffalo Bills. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.